The U.S. vetoed a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire. This is the fourth time that they blocked the ceasefire. We actually have video of U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, making a statement about this vote and what the plan is for the future of Israel-Palestine. And listen to her words.
Intend to do this the right way so that we can create the right conditions for a safer, more peaceful future. And we will continue to actively engage in the hard work of direct diplomacy on the ground until we reach a final solution.
A final solution? I mean, for people out there who don't know, that was literally the Nazi plan for Jews. That was the Holocaust, was the final solution. You kind of can't make this up.
I myself am very careful. Like because the Jews suffered this horrible genocide, and they're still traumatized by it, and they're carrying with that trauma with them to this day, including within my own family, right? My own grandparents. So I avoid making any comparisons to the Nazis like a hot plague, and I don't think people shouldn't do that. It's just I understand that there's so much trauma. So to use that phrase, I think is just somewhat out of touch, especially when it's the people of Gaza who are obviously the ones facing a genocide.
Right.
There was just by the way, on this question of the ceasefire, the United States government through its veto condemned, according to, so there was just a health report published by health experts. I just tweeted this out a few hours ago. Because after even once ceasefire is in place, you have communicable diseases, you have all of these, follow-on effects. You have injuries that are festering. There's people aren't getting proper follow-up treatment, right? Wound care, right? All these preventable deaths are going to happen, and they even put together estimates. And now I'm citing from this report that was just released. I think it was last week. So if there was a ceasefire today, you'd get, their estimate is that in the next 6 months, you'd get something like 6,500 people would die in the next 6 months from all of these follow-on reasons. But there's no ceasefire. So they said, basically, if current trends continue, leaving aside all the Palestinians that are slaughtered in the bombs and the targeted executions and the drone attacks, right? Leaving aside all of those deaths and the famine and people who are literally dying from starvation, leaving aside all those deaths, if current trends continue, 58,000 more Palestinians will die from preventable deaths in the next 6 months. So we literally have a government that is condemning tens of thousands of Palestinians to death. And it's, what can you say?
Can you talk about the history of ethnic cleansing and what you think Israel's plan is right now vis-a-vis ethnic cleansing? Like, why is Israel doing what it's doing?
I think the short answer is that there is this belief that the way you make life safe for Jews is by removing Palestinians from historic Palestine. That has been the belief for more than 75 years. It's beyond. So there's two layers of it, right? There's the belief about Jewish safety being the belief about Palestinian dispossession and Palestinian expulsion being a necessary precondition for Jewish safety and Jewish existence. That's number one, which is inextricably tied to point number two, which is that Jewish prosperity and which is fundamentally tied to Jewish demographic control, is also a function of Palestinian dispossession and displacement. In other words, to preserve the Jewish majority, you need to remove Palestinians from Palestine. And I don't think Israelis were planning on expelling Palestinians from Gaza before October 7th. They were happy to do it slowly. So the way they were doing it, so basically before October 7th, here's kind of how I would describe this policy, this overarching policy dating to November 1947 of Jewish safety and Jewish prosperity are a function of Palestinian dispossession and displacement. The way it was being, I would say, pursued before October 7th was in a very roundabout, indirect way, was you lock 2 million Palestinians into Gaza, and the only way out is by the sea or to Egypt. And in fact, it was an underreported trend over the past few years, but um, having recently visited Gaza and talked to a lot of Palestinians in Gaza, every single person in Gaza knows someone who has left. It's underreported. You have a few. There's a few Arabic language media outlets who have covered it, but you're talking tens of thousands of Palestinians have, because it's not being reported because Hamas doesn't want you to know about it. Israel doesn't really care. There's no international media there, so they're not reporting on it. So how do you even? And they go at night and they get on boats just like the Eritreans and Somalis and Sudanese and all the other refugees from Africa and North Africa have been doing crossing them, and Syrians and Lebanese. They've all been, braving the high seas in hopes for a better life in Europe. And Gazans are doing exactly the same thing, and that is ultimately a direct consequence of the siege on Gaza. So that's how they're removing Palestinians from Gaza. They're removing Palestinians from Jerusalem through basically the temporary residency status that is issued to Jerusalemites, right? So they they do not have Israeli citizenship, even though they live in Israel. I mean, according to what Israel calls Israel, they live in Israel. But they don't have citizenship. They weren't given citizenship when Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1967. And for the past 56 years, Israel has wanted to preserve a Jewish supermajority in Jerusalem. But how do you do that when you have 40% of the city is Palestinian? Well, you strip thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians from of their residency rights, and they've done that with 15,000 Palestinians, and every year a few hundred, a few thousand more. And in fact, what they've actually done is pushed Palestinians out of the city, not just through these racist laws about residency permits, but also by preventing Palestinians from building. Right? You cannot build a home in East Jerusalem. Good luck. You will not get a permit. 97% of permits are denied to Palestinians in East Jerusalem to build. So if you can't build, where do you go? You can't move into Jewish neighborhoods because, I mean, have you met a Palestinian in Jerusalem who's tried to rent an apartment in West Jerusalem? Well, I encourage you to speak to some, because the amount of racism and bigotry directed towards Palestinians trying to rent in West Jerusalem is totally insane. And they can't build in East Jerusalem. So where do they go? They have to leave, and then they lose their residency status. So that's how Israel expels Palestinians from Jerusalem. And then from the West Bank, West Bank is divided between areas A, B, and C, right? Areas A is Palestinian control, right? It's 20% of the West Bank. It's obviously not Palestinian control because the Israeli military enters Area A multiple times a day in multiple places in the West Bank. So Palestinians are being crowded into Area A. And in fact, in Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, you're 100 times more likely to be issued a home demolition order than you are to be granted a permit to build a home. And so you can't build. In fact, what you do build gets destroyed in Masal Faryatta, where you have 2,000 Palestinians facing daily attacks since October 7th. Not weekly anymore. It used to be weekly. Now now it's daily. You have daily attacks in Khumsa in the north, in the West Bank. You have many shepherding communities since October 7th. More than 1,500 Palestinians have been ethnically cleansed from their communities in the West Bank in the past 4.5 months. So this is ongoing. Khan al-Ahmar is constantly under threat. Palestinians around the West Bank are constantly in Beiteh. They're constantly attacked by the Israeli settlers who reestablished the post in the north. So you basically have a situation in which no matter where you are, and then we haven't even talked about Israel proper. And the Naqab, you have 60, 70 Palestinian villages, Bedouin communities who have been, by the way, the Bedouin have been in Israel Palestine for centuries. Okay. You want to talk about indigeneity? They've been literally, I mean, probably more like millennia. Okay. These people are the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine, and their villages are unrecognized. So they can't build homes. They build a roof with stone because you can't build a stone roof. Then it's a real structure. Then the Israeli military will come and demolish it. So it actually doesn't matter whether you're in Gaza, whether you're in Jerusalem, whether you're in the West Bank, or whether you are in Israel proper. If you are a Palestinian, you are either discriminated against, you can't find a home, you can't rent an apartment, or your village is unrecognized, or you're actively being ethnically cleansed, or you're actively, basically having a genocide committed against you. Those are sort of the spectrum of options if you're Palestinian.
Here's Israel gives nod to Gaza marine gas development, wants security assurances. That's from, when is that from? June 2023. Then we have another interesting thing.
One of the other things I just wanted to mention, Zach, I'm sure it's not news to you, was that I believe it was in September of 2022. Netanyahu was at the UN showing a map of greater Israel that did not include Palestine. It encompassed parts of Egypt and Saudi Arabia. When you said that they're wanting to rid the area of Palestinians was something that began after October 7th, that was like immediately where my mind went. It was like that. It seems to me like this was something that they've been kind of after for a little bit of time now.
In fact, it dates all the way to June 18th, 1967. When the Israeli cabinet met, they made a number of decisions. One of the decisions they made, and this has been public for decades. There was a Washington Post article published, I believe, in 1988 about it. We can share a link in the show notes. Basically, the decision made in 1967 was Sinai, we don't want it. We'll give it back. We'll figure out a way of giving it back to Egypt, which happened.
Hmm.
But Gaza, we want Gaza, right? Because Gaza is part of historic Palestine. But we don't want the Palestinians living in it. So once we figure out a way of ethnically cleansing them and incentivizing as many Palestinians in Gaza to leave, then we'll annex it. And in fact, from 1967 to 1970, I don't know. This is very little known history, but the Israeli government actually established a secret agency within it that was responsible for buying up land and helping Palestinians from Gaza find work in Latin America.
What?
Swear to God. This is little known. And then what happened was one of the Palestinians, because obviously this is all part of the same strategy, right? We want the land
Right.
without the people living on it.
Right.
And that's been the case since 1878 all the way to the present. That's kind of the thread that ties all of these different Zionists and all of these different movements within the Zionist world. But basically, they were, and then they convinced hundreds of Palestinians to actually go to Latin America from Gaza. And one of them, and it kind of blew back in their face when I think one of them didn't fully understand that they wouldn't be allowed back.
Right. Right.
And then there was violence, and it blew up, and it became public.
Mhm.
And I think they ceased to do that. I think in 1970 or 1971.
So it's just been this decades and decades kind of slow motion ethnic cleansing through various means, and then after October 7th, it's just mask off.
This is always the case, right? It's hard to ethnically cleanse people during times of peace,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That's why between 1967 and 1987, Israel only managed to expel 2,000 Palestinians from the occupied territories. It's
Mm.
hard. You
Mhm.
like, what's the justification? How are we going to do it? Right? It requires more planning. You have to do it. You have to time it with an American election so people aren't paying attention. Right? It's just much harder.
Yeah.
Whereas during times of war,
Right.
right? In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians expelled.
Right.
1967, 250,000 Palestinians expelled.
Right.
2023-24, 1.8, 1.9 million Palestinians displaced. We'll see how many they managed to push across the border.